The night's air continued to decrease in temperature, going down and down at a relatively slow pace, but decreasing nonetheless. The blue Pegasus had taken notice of the decreasing temperature, but had decided to pay no attention to it, instead choosing to simply continue to look at the stars above, under the tree. Austria has been under this tree for what felt like days, but the logical side of his mind reminded him it was only about 2 or 3 hours just because of the positions of the stars we're in. Every time he looked down from the stars, all he saw was the deep brown of the earth beneath him, and the rose he had brought with him. Austria smiled as he remembered the purpose of the rose, but it quickly fell as he remembered looking through the window of the one he had wished to give said rose to. Intentionally, he had intended to give the rose to the mare he had first met when joining his new job. He remembered every day she came by his part of the research center since the day he joined, and every time they did meet, they always shared lunch with one another and talked about their individual findings and experiments. Every time she had came along, she would always bring a smile on his face as she looked at Austria and bringing a warm atmosphere around her. And it wasn't long before he had realized he had feelings for this mare. Every time she came along, it would always be as warm and inviting as possible, even when she poked fun at his expense, such as his failed experiments or his Australian accent, which she completely reminded him of being odd. Nonetheless, their friendship grew and grew, and after some deciding and planning, Austria finally thought of asking this mare on a date. He dressed himself in a cheap black and white checkered pattern, tight button-up shirt, which he found easy to do with wings, packed extra bits with him, and even went so far as to plan ahead on where to take this mare, whose name later found out to be Colgate. On his way down to her home, he found a nice flower shop and purchased a single rose for Colgate. With some skip to his step, he continued to make his way down to Colgate's home, remembering the address she had told him before and brought him to every so often, trotting along with anxiety, energy, yet happy nonetheless. He was going to ask this mare on a date, and nothing was going to stop him. When he finally arrived at the house, he was surprised to see the lights had already been turned on. He was about to knock on the door until he heard laughter come from inside the house. Peeking in the house, attempting to avoid being seen, he saw a content stallion with a dark brown mane and a light brown coat lying on Colgate's couch, holding her with a smile on her face and a half-laid eyes. "I love you," she said as she looked up at the stallion. "I love you too, Colgate. I always have and will." With that, they nuzzled one another, giggled another time, and turned off the lights. That was about 2 hours ago. And now, Austria had once again looked up into the stars. Remembering the events that had unfolded had once again drained him of any feeling, making him numb as he remembered everything from Colgate's smile to the other stallion. The stallion who had apparently stolen Colgate's affection had looked similar to Austria, the only exception being Austria's color palette, blue for his coat and dark blue for his mane, and the fact of how Austria was a Pegasus and not an earth pony. He chuckled as he toyed with the thought of being somewhat close at achieving his goals of dating this mare that he held his attention for so long. For 5 months, he had known this mare, attempted to date her, and failed. He wasn't entirely disappointed at the fact at his failed attempt at a relationship. He was just disappointed at getting so prepared to actually date this mare that he hasn't even thought about another stallion being in the mix. How did you not see or think of him before? He thought to himself, wait, she never even mentioned the stallion before either. And every time I went there, I never saw another stallion there either. Why didn't she just tell me? He shook his head, and he decided to forget about the issue. After all, it's as they say, there's no point in beating on a dead horse. What happened happened. and there was nothing for him to do about it. He looked back up at the sky, now full of stars and amazing shades of blue and purple, and sighed, only to hear the slight eek come from the other side of the tree. Gasping at the shock of hearing another pony being up here, Austria got up and turned around to see what had caused the sound, and saw a young gray mare with a black mane and sweet purple eyes, with a pink bow around her neck. I'm sorry to have startled you, madam," he said as calming as he could, and clearly destructive mare. Are you okay?" She shook her head up and down after some time and got close to Austria. It was only now that he had noticed the slight blush forming on this mare's cheeks, along with his own. "Yes, I am. Forgive me if I happen to disturb you," she said as she got back up, now looking up at Austria, making her blush only grow as she caught sight of Austria. Are you sure? Your cheeks are a little, Austria was certain her cheeks were burning as he noticed they got a dark shade of red. Before she turned her face away from him before he could finish his sentence. "I'm fine," she said, sounding rather irritated at Austria. I'm just getting a little cold up here, and I was about to go home." "Well, do you think you could stay here a little longer?" Austria said, making the mare's ears pick up at his request. "You mean you're not angry?" He shook his head. "I don't see any reason to be angry with you. You didn't try startling me, and even if you did, I'm not that type of stallion to hold a grudge." The mare slowly looked back at Austria, and he tried his best to comfort the mare as he placed a smile on his face. When he turned to look at him, however, Austria began to feel a blush creeping onto his own face as well. The mare, lit by the light of Luna's blue moon, looked absolutely radiant as she stood in front of Austria. Everything about the mare was perfect, all the way from her luxurious coat to her beautiful purple eyes, and her beauty seemed to shine in the night perfectly. Austria, although nervous on the inside, showed no sign of nervous energy or anxiety around the mare, and continued to speak to the mare with a calming voice and a smile. "Why don't you join me? I could use a company tonight." The mare's blush returned to her face, and her hoof was risen to her mouth to hide it from a forming smile. She sighed. "I'm not sure. I'm not a very interesting pony to get to know." Her hoof was now on the ground, and her blush and smile were gone, now replaced by a forming frown. "Or so I've been told." Austria thought for a moment, and his smile soon returned to his face. "I don't believe that for a minute. After all, if you weren't interesting, I wouldn't be speaking to you right now, would I?" Her blush and smile returned, except this time the mare didn't try to hide it either. "I don't know," she said, looking at the moon to her side. "Please?" Austria said, still retaining his smile. She did the same, and she looked back at him, her blush growing slightly larger and darker. "Well, I suppose I don't need to leave quite yet." Slowly, Austria and the mare began to walk back to the tree, and after some time, took a spot next to one another, leaning against the tree, stick long and facing the moon. "So," Austria began, turning to the side of him to look at the beauty next to her, a smile on her face and her eyes shining in the moonlight. "Well, what's your name?" The mare turned to look at Austria, her blush from earlier now replaced with pink spots on her cheeks. "Octavia," she said, refined and sophisticated, with an accent something akin to British accent. "Octavia Melody. That's quite a beautiful name, if I say so myself, for such a..." Austria cut himself short. unsure of the results which may unfold if he let this mare aware of his feelings. "Such a what?" she asked, but quickly blushed after a few seconds of thought and turned away from him. This mare, though seemingly sophisticated, actually seems quite shy and timid. At any time, Austria had attempted to make hints at her, most likely due to the fact that they had just met and he had already had feelings for her. Although, who couldn't? This mare was absolutely beautiful, sophisticated, and even fun to be around. Who couldn't enjoy her company? "Please, just don't hate me after this. Or be dating somebody else. Or married. Or engaged. Or... Austria," he said after some time of looking up at the mare. "My own name is Astra Aquaduct." Although any pony who may be close to me calls me by my first name. Octavia's ears flicked up at hearing as his name, and slowly she looked back up at him, her blush still evident on her face. After a while, she googled. "That's quite the name for such a... Austria asked, but quickly retracted it after thinking more on it, and suddenly burst into laughter. She joined him, and together they laughed until their stomachs couldn't take it anymore. After gathering his breath, Austria finally spoke. "Right. Sorry about that," he said as he rubbed his head, trying desperately hard to rid himself of the blush on his cheeks. "No need," she said after gathering her own breath, "to apologize. You were only being polite," she said as she got close to Austria. The muzzles were mere inches away from each other's. Austria's blush grew as he felt her warm breath on his muzzle and mouth, taking note of her distance from him. Eventually she noticed too and quickly made a gap between their muzzles larger. The mare was more shy than Austria thought she was, and although it maybe seemed cold of him, he enjoyed her shyness. It was somewhat cute in a way, but made her seem vulnerable. No wonder why she shows himself as sophisticated so much. "So, tell me then, Miss Melody?" she noticing Austria's question. What do you do?" "What?" she asked, getting over her shyness and looking back up at him, her blush now gone and replaced with a look of confusion. "I mean, well, what do you do for a living?" The treble clef adoring her flank told him that she could be playing some type of instrument, but other than that, there wasn't too much Austria could tell. The mention of her line of work made her look of confusion turn to a look of sadness, for a reason Austria couldn't really understand either. "I'd rather not discuss my line of work. It's what brought me up here," Austria said as she looked at the large blue moon before her. "Me too," Austria said, barely above a whisper, but evidently speaking enough interest in the mare next to him to look back at him. You too?" she asked. "What do you mean you too? What brought you up here?" Her questions brought up memories from 2 or so hours ago that Austria had so neglected since meeting Austria. What should I do? Should I tell her? He thought as he weighed. On one hoof, if he told her, he would be honest with Octavia and had nothing on his soul. But on the other hoof, he didn't want her to think he could easily give up on the mare and jump after another. So there was only one thing to do. Tell her as little as possible. I've been having some trouble at my job recently. Coming up here helped me on my next course of action. It wasn't exactly the truth, but it was close enough to it that he could avoid her judgment. "Where do you work?" she said, curiously being completely evade in her voice. "I work as a scientist in practically every field, from chemistry to astronomy, although I mainly focus on oceanography." You do? She said, her cheeks now greening a small amount of pink tint in them. I'm sorry. Her apologies confused Austria slightly. What purpose was an apology needed? I don't quite follow you. What do you mean you're sorry? I don't quite think you're a scientist with an accent like that. Or being a Pegasus. He thought about what she just said, unsure whether to brush it off or just take it much more serious than that. In the long run, he chose the latter. Don't be. After all, most ponies don't know anyways when they first meet me. What about you? What do you do? Her face once again took a look of sadness at his question and looked back down at the ground. I don't think I should tell you. He placed a hoof on her own hoof, instantly making her head look back up at him and her pink tint becoming more seen. I told you my own story. I'd be grateful if you could tell me your own. She opened her mouth, ready to object, but closed it and decided to abandon her sentence. With a sigh, she spoke. I suppose I could tell you. After all, it's only fair. My true profession is music, as you could probably tell, and my instrument of choice is cello. Ever since I was a young filly, I dreamed of becoming Equestria's next greatest musical protege, and had been training all my life to join the Philadelphia Symphony. Her eyes suddenly had liquid coming to, but she paid no mind to it and continued on with her story. I would practice until my hooves were numb and play like nothing any pony had ever heard before. Whenever I played as a young school filly, audiences would look upon me with amazement. A smile crept across her face as she remembered her past, but failed when she remembered the present. One day, the opportunity arose for my wish to finally be granted when I was told the orchestra would be here in Ponyville for auditions. And I practiced as hard as I ever had. Finally, the day arrived for me to show the judges what I could do. And I played the best I ever had. Her voice now sounding scratchier than before, and the tears from her eyes now dreaded to be released. Today I got the letter from the orchestra, and Octavia didn't need to finish her sentence before Austria had wrapped his arms and wings around her, and in his grasp, she let loose the tears that she had tried to hold back. Austria continued to let her cry onto his shoulder, and began stroking her mane, hoping it would bring her some comfort, but to no avail. His day began to replay itself up until the part of seeing Colgate's kiss the other colt, who looked practically identical to him, minus the color scheme and wings. And in no part of his life did he experience what the crying mare in his arms did. To think that she had practiced all her life for a dream, only to have it dangled over her head every day for her life and forcibly yanked from her hooves. And right now, nothing was more important to Austria than to comfort this mare in her time of need. Shh, he said as he continued to stroke Octavia's mane in his minuscule attempt to comfort. There. I worked so hard for so many years, only to have it being rejected, she said, and then continued to cry. I know, he said, but you know what? Who cares about what they thought? He then took a hoof and placed it under Octavia's chin, lifting it to look at him while offering a warming smile. What matters is what your audience thought. If the orchestra didn't want you, then that's their loss. For what I can tell you, you seem to have more talent than any pony in the entire orchestra could ever possess. You're talented, intelligent, fun to be around, and beautiful. If those lousy ponies couldn't see anything that I do, then they just give up the opportunity to have the best performer that they could ever have in the history of Equestria. She continued to look at Austria, the moonlight continuing to light her in a way that Austria couldn't imagine was possible. Do you really mean that? She said, and Blush began seeing even in the blue light. He shook his head, every last word. And with that, Octavia closed the gap between them, enveloping Austria's lips with his own. At first, he was surprised by her sudden display of affection, but quickly decided to return her kiss with his own. Gone were either's thoughts of each other's woes, and now replaced by each other's company, warmth, and affection towards one another. The lights continued to shine down on the two, sending even more warmth to protect them from the chilly wind of the world. After some time, both Octavia and Austria had pulled away from their shared kiss, breathing for air and blushing. "Wow," he said, smiling and panting like an idiot, making Octavia giggle and blush at his compliments, looking back at the moon and the stars before suddenly turning back at Austria. "It appears as though it's getting late. I think it's about time that we both went home." She then got up onto her hooves and began walking away from the tree, but suddenly stopping and looking back at the tree, seeing Austria still sitting at the tree. "I was wondering if you would like to," she said, as she playfully dug on the ground with her hook, smiling and blushing as the thought of bringing him home with her. She didn't need to finish for Austria to start flapping his wings to float over to her, a smile still on his face. "Nothing would make me happier."